ICC, both of us are on ICC board, and we have that event again this year. And I thought it's relevant because this is who I am. I mean, this is what I care about, and this is important to me. I've always felt what is good for the heart is also good for the business. So sometimes, people focus on one or the other. I don't think it has to be. It doesn't need to be. There are times, of course, you want to do certain things to maintain profitability that, I'm not talking about charity, but there are, multiple ways that you can indeed participate in the community. And that is part of our value system anyway, with family. So with that, once again, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you, Raju. That's an amazing story. So before we get started for Q&A for the audience, I'm going to just ask a couple of questions. Try to embarrass Raju. Just kidding. So questions. First question is about VC investment. Actually, you have your first venture capital sitting next to you. No, I'm asking you. So all questions, right, at least from my side, is for you. So what were some of the lessons you learned from self-funding and once you took the VC money?
So, again, this is where having a good mentor certainly helps quite a bit. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not saying everybody should take that path, and I may not if I start another company. That I may not just do it all self-funded. Certainly not for 6 or 7 years that I did. But it's where actually having Kanwal. There was a time when we were getting very good traction with Oracle. As Kanwal, I think most of you know Kanwal is one of the founding members of TIE here, and in his own wisdom that is so well known for, he said, Raju, you can't launch a rocket fuel unless you burn. You can't launch a rocket unless you burn enough fuel. So let's go get some fuel. So in other words, you felt that's the right time when you're getting that traction. You can't scale the company just self-funded. So it is time to go get the capital. And I was lucky. That was a great time to raise money. Any entrepreneur, not just me, probably was, in a very good position to raise money in that time. And we had competing deals actually. So knows that too. And there again, Kanwal's wisdom that, hey, you should look at not just one VC, but because they have their own investment cycles, so try to get 2. And Walden, to their credit, they were one of the, I think you guys were pretty much the first one in India, right?
Yeah, 96.
96, and that's a lot to do with Som's sort of foresight. So we had NEA and Walden, but I would say, yeah, there is a time where you have to make the transition, and each company has to determine on their own. But for me, that was a key turning point.
So another related question to that, most of the VCs are not enamored with the services industry, especially when in late 90s, right? Where you can scale fast enough and it's not within the horizon they like to expect within 3 to 5 years, 10x or more returns. So how were you able to convince, other than SOM, of course you had NEA, so just trying to show some thoughts or some insight for the audience?
I don't know. I think it was timing. I don't think it had much to do with me as much as the industry environment. It was a time where, so please feel free to chime in here, but the VCs were, that is just about the dot-com bubble starting, right? And VCs were actually chasing a lot of companies, and we had revenue, so we had a certain basis. And again, having Kanwal on the board certainly helped with the credibility. And we're getting good traction. So now if you're starting today, is this a space that you want to be in? I don't know. There is always, it's a large enough space. There's wonderful companies today that are doing extremely well, certainly out of China. Some of the companies, Vans Info, I don't know if you know any of those guys, but they're doing extremely well. And they went public, I think, about 2 years ago. There are about 4 other companies from China that went public in the last 18 months on NASDAQ. These are companies, of course, you also hear about some horror stories of Chinese companies trading on NASDAQ, but by and large, so there is value to be created. Global Logic, a company here, based in, I think, Washington, D.C. headquarters, has a big presence here, again, focused on outsourced product development. Peter Harrison, a wonderful entrepreneur. And so I would say the market is large enough, so find your niche within that. And,
Thank you, Raju. So last question from me, and then we'll open it to the audience. The Sierra Atlantic was named as one of the top 10 best employers in China. So I mean, how were you able to achieve that, and what was your experience in doing business in China? Because you also hear a lot of horror stories, especially when I had my experience as a startup trying to do business there. So.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I would say is, yes, indeed, back up. I mean, sometimes we make too much out of the differences between different cultures, right? Yes, indeed, there are differences. Like, bring your parents to work. I couldn't have tried it here, certainly. But 80-90% of it is, hopefully, that's accurate, right? Yeah. Okay. I would love to if it works here, but yeah. So anyway, 80 to 90% of it is still the same. And one thing I've felt, whether it is China, India, or here, anywhere, right? People are sort of driven by two main things. They aspire for two main things. One, they all want to be part of something successful. It's really important for organization, their group, they all want to be part of something successful. More than money, more than any of that, right? And second, they want to be recognized well when that happens. So I feel the same principles apply as much in China or elsewhere. Now, at a different level, one thing I also found is sometimes, and I don't mean this in any sort of a disparaging way, but sometimes when I go to India, yeah, we tend to sort of, diminish what's happening in China. There's a lot of very smart people, very hungry people, very competent, and so in some ways, at least in the IT services space, they are, where India was 5 or 7 years ago. And at least I didn't have any challenges with the language either. But you're right though. There are a lot of horror stories that people do talk about. But with all these acquisitions, I mean, by the way, our China thing came through an acquisition. Bob and I actually went to China, looked at different companies for some time, 5 years ago, and they all had stars in their eyes. I mean, everybody had very unrealistic expectations of the values, and so finally we found this one company that's actually Boston-based with the China offshore. Mostly I think they had about 150 people or so offshore at the time, and about 10, 15 in Boston. So having the Western management team that knew them, and that I think helped us quite a bit. Yeah, so that's one way we were able to address the issue. But by and large, and the other thing is with any acquisition, I feel, I mean, having gone through 4 of them from the buyer side, of course I'm going through from the seller side now. It's really all about the hearts and minds of the people in the first 6 months at least, And so the more time you go and spend with these people, that are now part of your organization, I think whether they're China or India or any place, I think it makes a lot of difference. That's my opinion.
All right, thank you, Raju. So we'll open it to the audience now. So please be ready with your questions to ask Raju.
Just the mic. Use this mic.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your success. And I follow Indian outsourcing industry very closely, being in the same kind of business. And it is I may be wrong, but my observation is that most of the large Indian IT companies, the success is solely based on H1B program or visa program. And do you see that continuing, how that's going to play out in this current environment? And I'm also curious, what's the reason for that? Why the companies like TCS, Infosys have 95% of employees in India and very few here? And what's your perspective on that?
First of all, I mean, keep in mind that was the business model with which they all started, which is, cost. There's no question about it. But today, I mean, that industry has changed phenomenally over the last, 5, maybe pushing up to 10 years. There's a lot of process innovation that happens in these companies that Accenture and IBM and the rest of them have, I think it took them a little bit longer, but they have figured it out now. So I wouldn't quite say it's all about, H1B. I mean, most of their people are based in India, so they're not coming here on H1B, right? And second, yes, you're absolutely right. The current political climate, of course, makes it particularly challenging for most of these people to happy. But in effect, when they clamp down on H1B, what happened? More work moved offshore. I mean, that's really what happened. But I don't think it's so much about, moving jobs there or here, but now increasingly China and India, they're becoming consumers they're no longer just producers, right? So there are some really large deals that are happening out of India and China today. And not many people may know this. I think a couple of years ago, IBM had about 50% of the market share in India. And there were contracts, $1 billion or more. I think Bharti Airtel, or one of those, right? That is a contract of that size. So the world is changing. In my own company, again, I didn't get into the specifics of the business, but we started emerging markets. For us, that is China, India, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Just that's been the fastest growth, geography for us over the last 3 years. And so this notion that the customers are all here, that's no longer as true as it used to be. It's still majority. There's no question about it. But anyway, hopefully I answered that question.
Hey, I had a question. You mentioned a lot about trust, and you've been there for 17 years before you made your exit. Were there any things you did specifically in terms of practices to make sure that the trust was maintained within the top leadership and up and down in the company? Is there any insight you can share over there? That seems to be one of the things that seems to crumble very. If it crumbles, then it's the end game, basically, in a lot of the companies that fall by the wayside.
Yeah, I mean that. For one, when you have investors, right? You're absolutely right. I think the management team. I'm not going to say that people are not impatient. There was, and I myself was impatient about some of that. And the management. But when you have investors, normally they are the ones who are pushing you for an exit well before the management team and others, right? And I must say, not only did we have great investors, but they were certainly very, very supportive. And in some ways, investors are driven by one of two things, right? Again, with the utmost respect to all the VCs here, either fear or greed, right? That's true, right? And by and large, those are the basic emotions. So as long as they see that, hey, there's incremental value being created in the business, then they're perfectly fine with it most of the time. Of course, when they get to the end of their cycles on that investment, whatever with the LPs, you do have some pressure. So I did have some more pressure from GE that came in. They were not a board member, but we had others who could come in, and fortunately we had people who wanted to buy common stock even. So in fact, there was a case where somebody came in and got a very nice return of 6x or more within 12 months. So yes, that is a legit issue that does happen, and I'm not going to say everybody in the top management team also stayed throughout, right? Most of them did. I mean, they're all here.
So Raju, congratulations. And one thing I do want to comment is, Raju is one of those people that benefited from TIE, but he has been giving back throughout. I still remember we created a Hyderabad Global Support Network, and he was there to make that chapter happen. So congratulations for the good work, but also giving back to TIE.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
That reminds me, Raju was mentioning, I think Thai organization also had some shares in this company.
That's right. Actually, TIE did benefit as an organization. Yeah, I think they had 3 or 4. So yeah. Oh, is that right? Oh, Vakul knows why. We have all the father figures of TIE right here. I'm just honored. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, Vakul.
Okay, Raju, one of the questions I have is, you started out self-funded, and then after a few years you decided to take VC funding. What was the trigger point? I know you got some advice from one of your board members, or at least your advisors. But was there anything in the business which triggered that? And how did you sustain for 6 years? And what was your kind of revenue level when you went for funding at that time?
Yeah, so we're at about, I think, 15 million, going to something like about 20 plus something. So one of the things that I should mention is, our outside of capital constraints, when you get the VCs, you really attract some good quality management. I mean, the guys that I talked about, Mark here, who was my customer at Oracle, and he often likes to use a Remington shave guy, right? He liked the product enough that he decided to join the company. But I don't think he would have joined if I didn't have the VC money, right? And Bob also came right after that, about that time. So it's not just, there is an opportunity. It's mostly around the Oracle ecosystem. I mean, they were really, they were competing with TCS, and there was another company called Silverline. I think they sold their company to Cognizant or somebody. But anyway, for a significant project where Oracle was looking to outsource, they bought a company called DataLogix. So the entire transformation from the DataLogix, whatever tool set, I think it was built in Jam JPL, to the Oracle platform, was a huge investment for them. And that project was outsourced to Sierra Atlantic after very rigorous selection, across the different, competitors. And TCS was, very formidable competitor, right? So that is a very sort of a encouraging sign. And because after that, we were for a long time, even today, we are pretty much the #1 company in the process manufacturing side for Oracle, platform. And so oftentimes we say, we wrote the book on, Oracle on OPM, it's called. And in fact, a message to customers is, hey, if Oracle could come to us for their own work on OPM, why would you not? Whether it's Kellogg or Sherwin-Williams, these are all our customers in that. So I would say that's a very, important signal. But also separately, I was sort of digesting this thing of how do you attract this top talent, that really can scale the company and all of that, and so you needed the legitimacy of a VC coming in, and sometimes even with your customers, by the way. Customers certainly look at that too.
Hi Raju, thank you so much for inspiring us today. My question is, what are the different factors that, reasons that Sierra Atlantic finally, sold to Hitachi in 2010? I mean, the reason I ask is, at this, I've been looking at the campus and your growth perspective and stuff, and I'm pretty sure that you must have, one time or the other thought of being the next top company like Wipro, Cognizant, or Infosys, so the top 3. So did that ever occur or cross your mind?
Yeah. One thing I must say is, I always believe that you have to build your company to be a high quality public company someday. And then the right things will happen. At least just philosophically, I can't quite, agree with this notion of, you build it to be acquired by Cisco or this. It might happen in some select areas. But you can't focus on being acquired like that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there are a lot of good choices. It is not an easy decision. Absolutely not. And again, Hitachi, they went to Oracle, and Oracle said, well, this is the company to talk to. And although Phil Parr, my new boss now at Hitachi Consulting, I don't think he talked about it ever, but they also lost a couple of deals to us in the Chicago area. And, that's always a good way to get noticed. And so they did approach us, and we've been approached over the last 4 or 5 years by multiple companies. This is not the first one, and we had a lot of long discussions at the board level, and it was not a easy decision. There was at least one board member who strongly pushed for us filing for an IPO this year, and interestingly, we had a couple of other private equity offers, at the same time, because we had to respond within, I think 2 weeks, or Bob would know that better about that, right, Bob? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that, yeah. So, and we didn't want to kind of go shop the company, because that can be very damaging sometimes, because we knew what value, at a certain value, I knew there were enough people 2-3 levels down that will make, good money out of it, and so to me that was a big consideration. We certainly exceeded that, and, and then, so I think it was not a very straightforward decision, but it did come down to the fact that, in my mind, how often do you find a $100 billion company, that wants us more than we want them? And Hitachi Consulting, I didn't talk about it in more detail, but it's a wonderful, wonderful company, a real nugget within the parent Hitachi company. But there are only about 2,000 employees. So, this is a great place for my people. Now that campus I showed there, right now we have about, I think, 2,000 employees in India and China, and that campus holds about 1,600. So the way I think about it is, by ourselves, maybe we can grow that to 4,000 people over the next, 3 to 5 years. Now with this, it can probably grow to, 10,000 people or more, right? So all the reasons why I started the company, or, the growth and the career opportunity for each of these individuals, it made a lot of sense. If it were an Accenture or IBM or someone else, they would be just, lost in that, because they already have 100,000 employees. So this Hitachi thing was very rare, and I'll tell you, the level of commitment that they have at the highest levels within Hitachi. Right after the deal too, I met Kanemaru-san, who's the chairman of the parent company, $100 billion company, and Nakanishi, who is the president. I mean, they spent a full half hour with me, and part of that is the Japanese tradition, but I don't think at that level they needed to make that time. So this is, in fact, they told us that their stock, the parent company stock, moved up after this, which kind of surprised me, but partly because they've been talking about the strategy to become like an IBM someday, and so the market saw this as a serious move for the first time by Hitachi Consulting. So I would say those are all the reasons why the economics of the deal are right, but beyond that, this is an unusually good home for my employees. And 6 months into this, that's something I feel very, very good about.
Can you share economic side as much as
I don't think I'm allowed to. Yeah. Because I think Hitachi does not want to disclose. I mean, Bob, you want to comment on any of it? I know the backers, a lot of them are very surprised by how good. Bob, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think, we had investors who were very much supportive of the company to keep going. And so it would have had to have been a very good offer in order to get our shareholders to agree to it. And I think...
10 times return?
I don't think we can get into the specifics.
Yeah, but I think we have a lot of shareholders even here today, so I think they would all agree that it was probably beyond what their expectations were.
You worked out well. And the other thing, there is no contractual obligation for me to be there. There is no, so it's not just the other terms of the deal too. They were very, very good, and and I like that. I like that a lot about the way they structured these things. And now one of the good thing is they've done about 7 or 8 acquisitions over the years, and this is the largest acquisition that they have ever done. And so it's also, as a seller, it's good to have a buyer who's gone through so many acquisitions. So they're also much smarter about doing it right. Thank you.
I had a question for you. When you started your company, did you chart out that I'm going to be 100 million in this many years, or and the second question was, have you always experienced growth, or did you hit a time when growth didn't come that easy?
Oh, no, definitely. I mean, 17 years, there were at least 2 big cycles, 2 big events. One was the dot-com, the dot-com bubble. Clearly, the revenues did go down substantially, I would say, in that 1 year. But around the 2008-2009 time frame, we were flat. But we had a best profitable year though. So revenue was flat. We did not have any growth. I think in 2009, from 2008 to 9. But right after the dot-com bubble, again, the company did shrink on the top line. I forget how much, 25-30% 1 year maybe, But, and this is again back to the learning actually. It was there on the chart, I didn't dwell on it too much, but 17 years, but it's not till we finished 12 years that we did our first acquisition. And partly that's my own sort of learning. As a CEO, I had a lot of sort of reluctance to pursue any acquisition. Because I always felt, you're going to mess up the culture, inorganic growth, that's not right. But at some point I figured, scale is very important too. So if you don't grow, then the market won't take you seriously. Customers won't. Investors sometimes won't. Most of the time won't. So So the growth, I won't say it is always organic growth, but yes, we did have growth, but for I think a couple of years, 3 years at the most, Bob, over the 17-year period. Yeah.
Hi, my question is regarding the future of this particular industry.
in the last couple of years, few years, we've seen a lot of acquisitions, M&A happening. We've seen the high growth rates come down from as high as 50% to 20% of the Indian IT players. The US multinationals, the Europeans have come down to almost single digits. The margins have dropped. So what's your view about the future of this industry? Do you see the same rates coming back again in the near future, or probably there's a huge shift that has happened, maybe because of the commoditization or the nature of the industry? And the second question is regarding the India's competitive edge. So apart from, let's say, India and China, which are the other geographies you see who may play a major role in terms of global delivery?
You know what, actually, Som, you want to take that question and then I'll add to that? As a VC, you look at a lot of these companies and yeah.
I'll give my personal comments on the future of the industry. I think the biggest threat to the traditional IT outsourcing model is this whole notion of computing as a utility using cloud-based technologies and things like that, because that's going to have a major ramification on how people consume IT. In fact, a few days ago there was an interesting article in the Financial Times about what's going to happen in this industry. And really I personally see the ability to provide the benefits of technology in a utility model as the one that's going to have a major impact on the IT industry model as we have known it for the last 25 years. But the bigger companies are all pretty aware of that. So if you look at a company like Cognizant, they are actually spending lots of money trying to figure out how to incorporate cloud-based computing and things of that kind into their service offerings. So they're not sitting idle, but that is going to change the way we see this industry moving forward.
Yeah, I forget the last part of your question I was thinking about.
India competitive.
Oh yeah. Okay. Which are the countries and all that, right? Yeah, I don't know. I think India still has, they say about 500,000 graduates that still don't have jobs, and so there are these tier 2 cities. There's a large supply. When we went to China, that was one of the reasons. When you looked at Eastern Europe or some other places, they don't have the scale that China has or India has. So my sense is India will continue to be a very significant player in that. I mean, they may not have 90% of the market, but they'll continue to have 70% or higher, for the next 10 years. Who knows? I mean, subject to the political and other things going on. But there are other places, of course. Vietnam and Latin America is certainly coming up very well. But they may not be based on purely cost, but on serving customers in those regions, Brazil, Argentina, and all that. Chile, you're starting to see quite a bit of that. In fact, that's one area we are starting to think about, strategically. If we didn't do the Hitachi deal, in terms of an acquisition geographically, we'd be looking more at Latin America.
Yes, I'm wondering what it's been like being part of a large Japanese organization now. Has it been an adjustment? Have you seen any cultural differences, any challenges?
Well, it's been a little over 6 months, and I think, like most other things in life, it's expectations. Once you kind of set your expectations at a reasonable level, then, I mean, so far it's been very, very nice. I must say these guys have been very thoughtful about this acquisition. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't know if it's so much the Japanese culture versus just Hitachi itself as a company, Hitachi Consulting specifically, much more mature about acquisitions. Having gone through 7 or 8, some that did go very well for them, and I think that has a lot to do with it. So I can't think of much really that has been disruptive. But one thing is, I mean, Silicon Valley companies are different. It's not just, there are two things that are very different, right? One, we are very entrepreneurial in nature, and I had no other choice, but second, Silicon Valley companies, the large companies, also operate very differently from Hitachi or any of the other companies out of Japan or Europe. Sometimes we forget that. Or even they operate very differently from the companies on the East Coast, right? When we look at Oracle, or so hyper competitive at this stage, and Intel, they're always trying to reinvent themselves and do something else. So that is the difference. It's not just being a small and large company, but I think the Silicon Valley mindset to the rest of the world. And sometimes, yes, it's good that they have a long-term view of things, as I mentioned earlier. perhaps a little too long term, 20 years is way too long in our industry. I mean, things change way too fast, right? So, but it's only still 6 months. And I tell people, when they ask me about this, how long, and it took me 17 years to build the company. If it takes me 17 months to integrate it successfully and make sure it becomes a good home for my employees, and I feel they put a lot out, like Bob said. I mean, they really, there's a certain trust that they placed on us in this deal. So be it, and so another 6 months or 12 months, I might have a different answer, but right now it's pretty good.
Raju, you are primarily a services company, but you have created a lot of products and IP. How do you structure a company so that you can do that as well while you're doing services?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. And so when we raised the VC money back in '99, it was built around this notion of application networks, and part of that is IP for business process integration. And frankly, we had this strategic discussion at times, and should we become a product company, or and each time we came back with the answer, and looking back, I think rightfully so, that we use that IP as a differentiator. For a while, we had different sales team for the products, but that didn't really work as well. And so when we embed that product into the solution that we have as services, that's when we get the leverage. But it's easier said than done. It's easier said than done. I'm not sure if I had to, take this to be $1 billion company, I can have the same mix of products and services that I had at the time we sold. But one thing for sure, it does help you immensely in getting some of the larger deals, especially, at our size, at Sierra Atlantic, and when you're competing with the Infosys, TCS, and others, how else do you compete with them? In fact, just last week I was at a customer site, they're like a $11-12 billion company in Chicago area, along with Phil Parr, who's the CEO of Hitachi Consulting. And the customer basically said, hey, listen, I chose Sierra Atlantic about a year and a half ago, or Accenture, because of this. They had this thought leadership in this area, so service-oriented architecture for Oracle, right? Because of some IP that we built there. And today, we are bidding, and hopefully we will close that deal, which is several million, probably $40-50 million deal over the next couple of years for us, for the new company, combined company. So it does. Now, we are not selling IP, we are not selling software license there, but without that, we could not have had that edge in getting into that account and compete with Accenture. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
So you have a separate group that creates IP?
Oh, yes. Internally, we always had a separate R&D team, but on the sales side is where we experimented different things, and so the model that was in place last when Hitachi bought us was OEM deal. So Oracle, even today, I mean, they resell our software, the OEM, what's called SCM, net supply chain network, and that's kind of gets us into a lot of new accounts here.
I just wonder if you can comment on the technical challenges and the decisions that you made in choosing which market, which niche, and how to evaluate certain technologies. Like if you can give some insight into that.
Yeah, which market, which niche? I mean, early on, certainly, as I mentioned, kind of, find even when we started with Microsoft, right? One of the things that I found was it was very limiting, at least back then, I think even today, compared to Oracle. And the large enterprise application, they don't have, the budgets around implementing or doing anything around Microsoft technologies was very limited compared to Oracle technologies. So that's when we made the shift, even though we started with Microsoft. The guys at Oracle never cared for folks from Microsoft, but they certainly respected the fact that Microsoft is doing R&D work with us, right? That's what got us there. And after that, with Siebel, they were launching a big initiative around integration. We had this thing called application networks. That we had a trademark on it. And Siebel launched a major initiative called Universal Application Network. So we're always kind of constantly trying to find, these sort of large enough ecosystems. Again, back to the blueprint to a billion thing. I don't think I read that book or I listened to that at that time, but when I listened to that, it certainly made much more sense to me. So finding the right kind of, pillars around which you can build. Now some that didn't work. We tried around Mercury Interactive, around testing tools. That didn't quite pan out. So, and who knows? I mean, you also have to make the decision when to cut it off and, move on to something else. And for a while, every software company we worked with, Larry Ellison kept buying them. BEA was one of our customers. Plumtree, PeopleSoft, Siebel, Agile, It's amazing. I mean, every time we'd start an R&D relationship with somebody, we'd almost tell them, you might get a call from Larry within the next year. So the industry has shrunk that way, the enterprise software industry, at least the number of players, not the size of the industry. So I might have a very different strategy if I'm trying that today.
Any other questions? So I have one question. So since, as a service, you're looking at, as a service company, you're looking at all the verticals. So any words of wisdom in terms of trends or something for aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience? And of course, Som's insight was very good, I thought, on the utility-based model.
Yeah, I don't know about services necessarily, but one area that I always like to work with some of the entrepreneurs, and even while I was running Sierra Atlantic, and that's something this institution, TIE, gave me, right? So I felt it was always important for me to participate in that. And it's not so much about giving back as much as actually it's a selfish interest. I learn and I become better. And so one of the areas that I'm certainly looking at is consumer internet in India. I mean, that space is growing very rapidly. Right now, the market penetration for internet in India is somewhere between 5 and 10. I believe it's at about 8%. China, it's at 40%. I mean, US is 96%. We don't think about it. So that 8 will go to 40% sometime. I don't know whether it's 3 years out or 4 years out, 5 years out. But there are a lot of new opportunities that are coming up in that space, and a lot of wealth creation too, obviously. In fact, there's a wonderful company called Redbus. I don't know if any of you heard of that. They were here at the Thana Business Seminar just last weekend. This wonderful young entrepreneur, Fanindra Sama, they right now do more transactions per day than Make My Trip or Amazon, Flipkart, I think, which is Amazon of India. And so this is all consumer internet. So that's a very exciting space. Now clearly, energy, I mean, if you think about it, that's measured in trillions of dollars, right? Compared to the IT, that's like 6 trillion. And there are a lot of smart people in the valley who know that much better than I do, but So at this stage, I'm kind of just listening to some of these people, and I had the good fortune of working with a wonderful young entrepreneur named Harun Mirza out of Toronto. Again, came through the TIE mentor program. His company called Cognovision was bought out by Intel. Same time, Hitachi bought my company. In fact, TIE actually did a wonderful story at TIECon with Kanwal, me, and Harun. I mean, that's kind of the essence of TIE. 3 generations of entrepreneurs, each spaced about 15 years or whatever. And so yeah, personally, I think there are a lot of exciting areas.
Any other questions from the audience? So before we wrap up, one thing, so next month we have in this program, My Story, which is on August 4th. Usually we have it on first Tuesday of every month, but sometime due to the schedule and the entrepreneur we are featuring. So it's Anand Raja Raman. So some of you may know him. Successful serial entrepreneur. He just sold recently his company called Cosmix to Walmart, which is a traditional, retail company, but very successfully. He'll be here on August 4th, and in fact, in late 90s, just right out of school, even without finishing his PhD at Stanford, they had sold a company called Zemily. And if you are very much into utility computing, so Amazon has a service called Mechanical Turk, and he was one of the inventors of that as well. So please, if you are here in town, so make sure you sign up for that. And with that, I'm going to conclude, and Raju will be here. And Raju and Som, again, let's give them a round of big applause.